Well, hello, guys, and welcome to this special sports edition right here on ABC 10 Plus, where we are recapping the 2024 NBA Draft, which just wrapped up today, Thursday. I am Kevin John. Standing next to me, Matt George. Of course, we are both sportscasters here with ABC 10. Matt George is obviously your Locked On Kings podcast host and Kings expert. So, Matt, let's just dive straight into it. Yesterday, or should I say leading up to yesterday, and when I say yesterday, Wednesday, the first round of the NBA draft, there was a lot of talk, a lot of speculation on what the Kings would do with the pick. Are they going to trade it? Are they going to hang on to it and draft someone? Well, we found our answer yesterday. They ended up drafting Providence's Devin Carter with the 13th overall pick, and I don't think it's necessarily off the charts to say that it was initially met with mixed reaction from Kings fans.
Yeah, I don't think that's off the charts at all, because that was my initial reaction. When the news broke that the Kings were going to be drafting Devin Carter, I thought it was pretty it made sense based off of Monte McNair's track record. Monte McNair, Kings general manager, he has a type. He likes older guards in the draft. 3 out of the 4 times he's been in the lottery, he's taken a guard. Tyrese Halliburton, Davion Mitchell, now Mr. Devin Carter. So initially it was like, why are you taking another guard? At that time, with the drafting of Devin Carter, the Kings had 8 guards on their roster at that time. That's obviously far too many. Meanwhile, this offseason, to me, a lot of it is about addressing the depth issue that you have at the wing. Guys that are 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". They can play the small forward and power forward position. Guys that can help you defend on the perimeter, but can also space the floor and knock down shots. The Kings have lacked that and needed that. And using the 13th overall pick, there are options, whether you wanted to draft a player like Tristan da Silva or Dalton Connect, or if you wanted to trade the pick away, which is the route that I wanted the Kings to go. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of smoke around them potentially trading that pick right up until they decided to make a selection. So my initial reaction was probably more on the negative side. It didn't make sense to me. Why are you going and drafting another guard? But then I thought about it more. And I started watching a little more of Devin Carter's game. We got the opportunity to speak with Devin Carter. Got the opportunity to speak with Kings general manager Monte McNair. You can check out both of those conversations on abc10.com. And as we got more of that context, and as I thought more and more about what the ultimate goal of this offseason is to me, in addition to, of course, getting back to the playoffs, it's about getting the coaching staff and their philosophy and your roster on the same page. Well, to me, Devin Carter is 100% a Mike Brown guy. Devin Carter does all those things as a versatile defensive first guard, someone who can space the floor on the offensive end. He shot a 37% clip his most recent season at Providence, which is very encouraging. So on offense, you can see how he can fit. But on the defensive end, that's where he really shines. He's a guy that takes defending seriously. He almost takes it personally if you score on him. It at times seems like he enjoys defending you more than scoring on you. And there aren't a ton of guys in the league like that, and those guys are very valuable. Plus, he might be 6'2". He's got a 6'8", almost 6'9" wingspan, which is a ridiculously long wingspan for a guard of his size. And not only does he use that wingspan on the defensive end, he uses that to rebound. Mike Brown has been calling for improved rebounding. The Kings have the best rebounder in the league 2 years in a row in Domantas Sabonis on this team. But that doesn't mean that all the rebounding is on his shoulders. Mike has called for everybody, including the guards, to go out and rebound more. They're bringing in a 6'2" guard who averaged almost 9 rebounds a game at Providence. And Monte McNair spoke glowingly about those rebounding numbers translating to the NBA and what that says about him as a player and the kind of NBA player he will be. So versatility is really the word with Carter. He's someone that can come in, do multiple things on both ends of the floor for Sacramento. I think Monty said it best. When you watch the NBA playoffs, there are a lot of Devin Carter type players out there making important impacts on playoff basketball, and the Kings think they found their guy.
Yeah, you know, this guy is a combo guard. Like you said, he gets it done on both sides of the court. He averaged almost 20 points a game last season, while also wreaking havoc on the defensive side of the ball, a little over 8 rebounds per game. So when you talk about his versatility and what he's able to do, clearly, if you've watched the tape from last year, like you said, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it, you see what he does. But I want to go back to something real quick, Matt, to the draft. And what Monty was kind of talking about in his post-draft conference, or shall I say post-round 1 of the draft conference. You know, it's interesting. A lot of times with these NBA drafts, Matt, you hear people say, do you draft for need, for what makes the best with that situation for that team, or do you draft best player available? And I remember that Monty said when they saw that Carter was still available at 13th because they had him high up on their board, they knew that they had to go after and get him. So, yes, going back to my initial point as far as the mixed reaction, you're right. When you already have 7 other guards on your roster and you draft another guard, you know, what is that? How does that address a need that your team requires or that you feel your team needs? So I guess with that being said, are you, when it comes to drafting for what your team needs versus drafting for the best player available, do you feel that this is an individual who was not only drafted because he was the best player available, but also drafted because he can fill a need that this team has?
Well, the debate you're talking about is a debate that's been as old as time. It's almost like a chicken or an egg type debate, right? Like drafting for fit versus drafting best talent available is always going to be debated when you approach the draft every single year. Now, I typically actually lean more towards the drafting for fit versus drafting best player available. Monte McNair is almost the complete opposite. He talks a lot about his drafts are, hey, I draft not just for next season, I draft for years upon years in the future, and they're projected how good that they can be. Look, the Sacramento Kings had De'Aaron Fox on their roster. They went out and drafted Tyrese Halliburton. We were hoping it would work. Didn't really work out too much. Tyrese Halliburton turned into Domantas Sabonis. Those two helped the Kings get back to the playoffs. So even if you draft a player at a position that you don't necessarily need, if they're a really, really talented player, you can always move them down the line to bring in assets that you do need. But fit is important too, right? Especially in a situation where the Sacramento Kings are at, to where they're not trying to rebuild. They're not trying to put themselves in a position to maybe compete for a championship 3-4 years down the road and see what they can build with a young core and exciting young roster. That's not where they're at anymore. Monty said it after the press conference, or during the press conference after round 1 of the draft. He said, the goal is the playoffs. Anything less is unacceptable. Well, if that's the case, the Kings just had an unacceptable year because they just missed the playoffs after finally making the playoffs for the first time in almost 17 years. Why did they miss the playoffs? And a large reason was because of their lack of wing depth. They lost to the New Orleans Pelicans 6 times, including the game, the second play-in game, that eliminated them from playoff contention and ended their season because they could not compete with the depth at the wing of the New Orleans Pelicans. That matchup killed them. And you look around the league, around the trades that were made during the draft, before the draft, a lot of teams going out and trying to bolster the wing position. They say this is a guards league, and I understand that sentiment. Meanwhile, you have MVPs or big men winning MVPs from Nikola Jokic to Joel Embiid. And on top of that, you have teams doing everything in their power to bolster the wing position. It just goes to show you every single position is still important and viable to winning a championship in the modern NBA. But the Kings have a lot at one position and not a lot at another. So that's why I thought this is a perfect opportunity for them to address that, whether it's by getting a wing, drafting a wing, or by trading for a wing. Now they've got Devin Carter. Again, it goes back to how does he fit Mike Brown's system? Just because you brought in a guard and you drafted a guard when you have 7 other on your roster doesn't mean Carter doesn't have the potential to be a top 3 guard on this team. Number 1 and number 2 are already settled, right? It's De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk. But number 3 at this point is what? Keon Ellis. Keon Ellis, a good player. He was on a 2-way contract just a year ago, right? So there's an opportunity for this young man to come in, and even though you have a bunch of guards on your roster, you selected him because you think his upside is so high that he can come in and not only impact winning right away, but maybe you have found your starting 2 guard of the foreseeable future next to De'Aaron Fox. So these are all things that Monty and his front office have to take into account. Initially, I did not like the selection for the position, not for the player, because I felt the Kings needed to address, and they still need to address that wing position. But Monty basically said they had options. They had opportunities. There were deals in front of them. They were discussing opportunities to trade that pick away. They also had players like Dalton Knecht that were on the board. People didn't expect Dalton Knecht to fall that far. But what Monty said was, with all the options available to them, none of them were better than Carter. He was there at 13. They did not expect him to be there at 13. They ultimately decided he is better than any other option that we have right now. They went that route, and we have to trust him. And look, Monte McNair's track record when it comes to the draft so far, it's pretty darn good. So maybe we trust him.
Absolutely, and in McNair we trust. Now, with that being said, obviously only time will tell, and we're not going to know a few years from now whether or not this pick truly does work out for the Kings. But in the meantime, it definitely seems like you like it, Matt. And I just got to say, from following Providence, Twitter, Friar Twitter, all of that stuff, the main thing that I kept hearing over and over when talking about Devin Carter was the word dog. And they say that you guys got a dog in Devin Carter, a scrappy player. You see this guy fighting through screens that can test shots, three-point shots and everything. So, like you said, a person Mike Brown would definitely like. We all know Mike Brown is defensive-oriented, even though, ironically, they had historically the best offensive season a couple of years ago. But Mike Brown loves defense. And I'll never forget Steph Curry, when we did an interview with him 2 years ago after Mike Brown was hired. He said, if you're not going to play defense, you're not going to play for Mike Brown. So with that being said, a really good pick, solid pick, and I think that Carter will do great stuff with the Sacramento Kings. Now, I want to talk about the second round of the draft today, since you were talking about Monty McNair's draft, his draft record over his time being with the Kings. One of the players that he drafted, he actually just traded earlier today, and I'm talking about former Baylor guard Davion Mitchell, who the Kings drafted in 2021 in the first round. And he is now heading to the Toronto Raptors along with the two-time EuroLeague MVP, Sasha Vezenkov, who was a interesting prospect when he came to the Kings last summer, especially seeing his success that he had overseas. Unfortunately for Sasha, it just kind of did not work out with the Sacramento Kings, especially when you looked at rotations. And also, unfortunately for Sasha, he did get injured last year and missed a substantial period of time. So really, but even if he was 100% healthy, I'm not saying that it would still have worked out with Sasha and this team. But anyway, a guy that Monty picked. So you go back to who Monty picked in 2020. He traded him away in Tyrese Halliburton in order to acquire Domantas Sabonis, and then his pick the following year, 2021, Davion Mitchell. He traded him away this morning along with Sasha in order to acquire Jalen McDaniels from the Toronto Raptors. So I guess my first thing to you, what was your initial reaction to this?
Well, I mean, sad to see Davion Mitchell go to some extent. Davion was a player that really impressed me with how he ended this past season. Midway through last season, I was thinking the writing was on the wall. I thought a breakup between the two sides was coming. I think Davion Mitchell does, to some extent, need a fresh start, and I'm excited to see him get that with the Toronto Raptors. But the way he ended the season, as the Kings started to figure things out defensively, and Mike Brown really figured out how he could work Davion and Keon and De'Aaron and all these guards together at the same time, we really saw him start to blossom. So I would have had no problem with Davion Mitchell remaining a Sacramento King going forward. But as soon as the Kings drafted Devin Carter, it made it a whole heck of a lot easier to move Davion Mitchell. Now, when you're talking about this trade specifically, this is a really tricky trade because on the surface, it doesn't look like the Kings made a very good deal because this deal has everything to do with finances and really nothing to do with players. And that's no disrespect to Jalen McDaniels. Maybe he's a solid player. He does add wing depth, bringing a 6'9" guy. That's not a bad thing. But this trade is not about him. The trade is sending Davion and sending Sasha to Toronto and getting them to take a majority of salary for you to only take back $4 million in the McDaniels deal and ultimately move yourself $7 million beneath the luxury tax. Now, quick idea of what the luxury tax is. Once teams pass a certain salary threshold, and it goes up all the time, it's going to continue to go up, especially with the new TV deal coming. But once you pass into the luxury tax, you now have to pay a certain amount of money, a percentage of money based off of how much money you're over that tax. It's there to keep a competitive balance, right? So teams don't just go New York Yankees or go, I don't know, like Man United or Manchester City and
just throw money at
exactly,
and get
buy everybody, right? The idea is to keep things more competitive. But in addition to the luxury tax, which every team can go over and start to pay out of pocket, there are also things called luxury tax aprons. These are put in place to avoid owners who go, I don't care, I'll pay the biggest luxury tax bill in the world as long as I'm winning. So these aprons are put in place to, it's almost like competitive checkpoints. Once you get past a certain apron, you're limited on things that you can do going forward, like certain trades or certain signings. You can't make those moves without going over the threshold again, so you're not allowed to make those moves, just to keep things competitive, right? By making this trade, the Kings dropped $7 million under the luxury tax threshold, and an additional $7 to $7.5 million under the first apron. So really, I think the expectation is going to be the Kings are going to move into the luxury tax. I think you have to some extent, to be competitive in the Western Conference. But you now have almost $15 million worth of space to use to go out to make a trade, to sign a player, maybe both. You now have a little more financial flexibility to be able to make moves going forward. That's the thing with this trade. This trade has to be a precursor to something more. And I think all signs point to it will be. Now, we don't know what the more is yet. Hopefully the more happens. I know some Kings fans are nervous because they were expecting the Kings to do more at the trade deadline and nothing happened. Do more last season and nothing, or last offseason and nothing really happened. I understand that. Monty, this is a move that puts Sacramento in a position to make a bigger impact and go out and get bigger impact players than the two they sent to Toronto for the assets that they got back. In addition, the Kings also sent 2 second-round picks, including today's round
45th pick.
The 45th pick as part of that deal as well. So it was a lot to give up, but you need to give things up to get teams to be willing to take on salary to help you financially open up your books a little bit. The buzzword for Monte McNair is flexibility. He loves flexibility. Now he has it because of this deal.
Well, you know, when I saw that this broke earlier this morning as well, I thought the same thing. When I saw you were giving up Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov, I'm like, okay, I wonder what's going on in return. And this is not a diss to Jalen McDaniels, but when I looked at his stats last season, I think it was 3 points a game or something like that. I'm not looking at this as, oh, the Kings are trying to acquire a whole lot of talent. It seemed like there was something more to it. So thank you, Matt, for explaining that to a lot of the viewers that may have just been, who may have been confused about it as well. And ultimately, I think I had texted you or someone this morning, and I was like, I think this is Monty building up for something bigger to happen.
It has to be. It has to be.
You know, especially at this point in time. So with that, so yes, the Kings didn't have a pick during today, the second round of the draft, as a result of that trade. But shortly after the draft, it was announced the Kings did acquire 2 players, one from Louisiana Tech and Isaiah Crawford. He agreed to a 2-year deal with the Sacramento Kings. And then Washington State's Isaac Jones, who also agreed to a 2-way deal with the Sacramento Kings as well. Once again, this was news that broke after the conclusion of the NBA draft today. So with these two particular, and I'll be honest, I kind of had to look up some information on both of them because I didn't know a lot about these two guys when they tweeted, when this was initially released. But, you know, same thing with these guys. You're bringing them in on 2-way contracts. Yep. Okay, so 2-way deals. So, you know, kind of I don't want to say low risk, low reward, but, you know, you're bringing them in on 2-way contracts. But what are the Kings expecting in your eyes to do with both of these guys? And how do you see them fitting there?
Well, just a friendly reminder, too, that after the Keegan Murray draft a handful of seasons ago, the Kings signed a guy named Keon Ellis to a undrafted free agency 2-way contract.
May have heard of him.
Keon Ellis turned into the starting 2 guard for the Sacramento Kings. So there's value to be had here. Undrafted free agency, it's different, right? Here is an opportunity for teams to go out and directly negotiate with players that they're interested in. More importantly, here's an opportunity for players to choose where they go. And in some circumstances, you can choose areas and choose teams that you think could use your skill set. It worked for Keon Ellis. He knew the Kings needed a 2-way guard. He went out, signed with the Kings, worked his way up. Look where he is now. The Kings need wing depth. We've talked about this a lot. So what did they do? They went out and signed 2 wings to 2-way contracts. Now, a quick idea of what a 2-way contract is. Each team has 3 2-way contracts. Essentially, when you sign a 2-way contract, it does not take up one of your main roster spots. These are special contracts in place to where these players they're basically a hybrid between your G League team, which of course for the Kings is the Stockton Kings, and the main team, the Sacramento Kings. Now, they can spend pretty much the entire season with the main team, practicing with them, developing, and getting better. But they're only able to dress and play in a certain amount of games before that contract has to be converted into a full contract. That's what happened to Keon Ellis last year. He started the season as a 2-way player, never played in the G League, period. He was so important to the Sacramento Kings all season long that they converted him to a main contract, which is he is under right now. So the Kings have 3 of these contracts. 2 of them now are accounted for. The other one maybe up in the air a little bit. Jalen Slauson was one of their two-way guys last season. He was the draft pick in the second round last year. Maybe it stays with him. You also have local boy Jordan Ford, who is under a two-way contract, and we don't know what his circumstances will be. But two are now accounted for with these two undrafted free agents. And let's just talk about them really quick, right? Two wings. We'll talk about Isaiah Crawford first out of Louisiana Tech. He's a forward, 6'6", but a 7-foot wingspan. He's 22 years old, known for a high defensive upside, many calling him a pest defensively, which the Kings could absolutely use more of. Averaged 16 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals a game at Louisiana Tech. Now, that's a full stat line. That stat line probably won't convert to NBA numbers necessarily, but it shows he's versatile. He can do a little bit of everything, but his upside is really on the defensive end with a 6'6" body and a 7-foot wingspan. The Kings absolutely could use more of that. Then you have Isaac Jones out of Washington State, another forward, probably more of a power forward than he is a wing. 6'9", a 7'3" wingspan. This is a big guy. He's someone that has good touch around the rim, has good interior scoring, does not have a jump shot whatsoever, so developing his perimeter outside shot is going to be important. Someone who is big, who is physical, so defensively that can work. More on the slower side, though. So he's more of a power forward center than he is a wing, but still a big body. You give him a two-way contract. There's really no risk to it. You get them in their system, develop them under your system, and see what they can potentially turn into. So two pretty solid pickups for the Sacramento Kings.
And definitely, like you said, both of them being wings kind of fill some of the voids or needs that the Sacramento Kings can utilize at this time.
Get more bodies in there.
Now, as we kind of wrap up this draft special here, I kind of want to look ahead, Matt. We kind of talked, or you kind of talked about how the whole Jalen McDaniels trade could be a precursor to something else that's going to happen here. When I'm looking at the West, and I'm looking at all the other teams in the West. I'm looking at Minnesota. Yep. I'm looking at Denver. I'm looking at OKC. I'm looking at Dallas, who actually is the defending Western Conference champions. Looking at the Clippers, depending on what Paul George ends up doing. And then I'm looking at the other teams who finished below the Kings last year. The Los Angeles, or excuse me, I shouldn't say below because the Kings were 9th in the West, and they had Golden State was 10th. But I'm also looking at the other teams in the play-in. New Orleans, Los Angeles Lakers. And then you think of some of the other teams, Matt, who were off the radar last year but are going to get better in Houston. San Antonio, potentially. So I'm saying all of that to say this. Yes, when you look at this Kings roster right now, Matt, it's good and they're looking to do something. But when you look at those teams, especially the Denvers, the Minnesotas, the Dallases, the ones we know aren't going anywhere next year, and you look at what the Kings have to do in order to be competitive in a very competitive Western Conference. Is it still safe to say that Monty is still trying to swing for a Zach LaVine, for a Kyle Kuzma, or for some other, proven player or wing in the league that can come and instantly make the Sacramento Kings team not just a contender, but a deep playoff run contender?
Well, what's your primary motivation? I think that's one of the big questions, too. If your goal is just to get back to the playoffs and hope to build upon that in future years, you don't have to make that big splash move right now. If you're trying to compete for a championship next year, you probably need to. But the Kings aren't in the same position as a Lakers or a Spurs, or a Suns or a Clippers. These are teams that are built to win like they have to win a championship right now. Their windows are only closing. Sacramento, they just re-signed Malik Monk. They have Domantas Sabonis just starting his new deal. De'Aaron Fox and Keegan Murray are going to have to be paid in the next couple of years, but you're talking about players that are in their prime to just entering their prime, right? So there's not a super sense of urgency of we got to win a championship and compete for a championship right now. Of course, they'd like to. Mike Brown and the Kings want to try and win the title next year. If not, what the heck are you playing for? But they don't have to. So the Kings are in a position right now to where they can keep an eye on what's out there. Maybe it's Zach LaVine who's become available and probably pretty cheap because of his contract. Maybe it's Kyle Kuzma because the Washington Wizards are building towards a rebuild. Whatever it may be, does that player make sense for your current and long-term plans? Financially, does it make sense for you? And does it make sense with the assets that you're going to have to give up? That's all. These are all the decisions that the Kings and their front office, they're weighing right now. So ultimately, if they decide to make a deal, which I think they're setting themselves up to do so, it's because they are confident or comfortable that that option available to them this summer is the best option to check as many boxes as possible. Versatility, again, is the word. It was the word with Devin Carter's pick, the Devin Carter pick. It's the word with just how the Kings want to run this team. They're looking for versatile players that give them options today and tomorrow. If Kuzma's that guy, they'll find a way to go out and get him. If Zach LaVine's that guy, they'll find a way to go out and get him. But I wouldn't say there's a sense of like, we have to make a move right now. I will say this. The Kings have to do something. It doesn't have to be a star. It doesn't have to be a high marquee, big name player. But clearly, with the way this roster is constructed, you still got 7 guards on this roster and still need wing depth, and now you have a little bit of cap space. You have to add something. The question is, are you going to try and prioritize another potentially significant name by using Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, or are you just going to try and shore up the rotation and commit to the core that you already have here of Fox, Sabonis, Murray, and Monk? Some people don't think that's a good idea, especially with how competitive the Western Conference is. I understand that approach, but that's the decision for Monty to make. Is it worth it to strike right now? Is now the time to go all in?
I totally hear that, and I think we all saw that by running it back this year, it didn't quite work, especially in a Western Conference that's not getting worse, but only getting better from here on out. So, yes, while the Kings are not like, yes, it's championship or bust next season. Of course they're not like that, but at the end of the day, you look around at some of the other teams, and not just in your division, but in your conference, and you're like, oh, they're getting good. They're getting good. I see what they did. Okay, we need to elevate our play. So before we get out of here, man, I'm just going to put you on the spot. If you had to give a grade, a letter grade to the Kings for this particular draft, A through F, what would you give them?
Well, it's going to be a two-parter. The Devin Carter pick, I'll give a B just because of the player and the third. It's hard to get an A. A lot of people are actually going to say it's an A pick because a lot of people are really high on Devin Carter, and that's pretty exciting. I'm going to give it a B, but really it kind of is a B/incomplete because in order to make that selection, it opens you up for opportunities to do more. And this offseason is all about doing more. The pick by itself makes sense. I'm excited for it, which is why I give it, that element of it, the B grade. But the Kings have a lot of work still to do this offseason. They still have gaping holes that they have to fill. They still have assets that they need to move, and I know some of them they want to move. So the offseason is far from complete at this point.
I totally hear you. And Matt, I was a B student in school, so I'll definitely take B as a...
B's are not bad.
B is not bad. It's not A, but it's not bad. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this special edition. Just want to remind you again, you can tune into the Locked On Kings podcast for all of your Kings information, of course, hosted by this man, Matt George, right there. You can see it on ABC 10 Plus, YouTube, and all the other digital platforms. In the meantime, thank you guys for watching this, and you can view more Kings content from us on the ABC 10 sports page of abc10.com or on our YouTube page.